Think about it. A super strict, literal reading of some texts might prohibit investing in any company with any non-compliant element, which, as we said, makes investing in today's world almost impossible.
Right, because purely compliant companies are so rare.
Precisely. So fiqh principles like necessity allow for a certain limited degree of non-compliance. It's seen as necessary to enable Muslims to participate in the economy and investment markets practically.
It's about finding a workable balance. Do we have an example of a group using this FIKI method?
Yes, the article mentions TASIS as an example. They really emphasize looking at actual market conditions to objectively determine what level of non-compliance might be considered necessary or unavoidable in a given context.
So they use market data.
Right. They might look at things like four-year averages for debt levels or interest income in a particular market to set their thresholds. The idea is to avoid purely subjective judgments and base the thresholds on objective reality while still encouraging improvement.
Can you give specific examples of TASIS's thresholds based on this?
Sure. For interest-bearing debt, TASIS apparently set a 25% threshold against total assets. Now, the paper notes that market averages might have been higher, like maybe 29.4% in India during a certain period.
So why 25% if the average was higher?
They chose a lower, stricter threshold. The reasoning seems to be to push companies towards better compliance, to encourage a larger pool of shariah-compliant options over time, rather than just accepting the status quo average.
Okay, that makes sense. What about illegitimate income?
For illegitimate income, they went with a 3% threshold. Here, the average interest income might have been lower, perhaps around 1.79%. But setting the threshold at 3% allowed more companies to pass the screen.
So a bit more lenient there.
It seems so. It's a balancing act, making the screening accessible enough for a good number of companies to pass, while still maintaining the core principles. The article notes this pragmatic approach resulted in about 83% of companies passing their financial screen after getting through the sector screen.
Interesting how they adjust based on the specific metric. Okay, that's FIKI-based. What's the third and final method?
The last one is the mixed approach, and as the name suggests, it kind of cleverly combines elements from both the NAS-based textual and FIKI-based jurisprudential principles methods.
A hybrid model.
Exactly. The article uses Yassar as an example here.
And how does Yassar mix these approaches? What thresholds do they use?
Well, for debt analysis, Yassar uses that 33% threshold. That comes directly from the a third as much hadith we talked about earlier.
Okay, so that part is NAS-based, text-based.
Correct. But then for the ratio of liquid assets, cash, and receivables to total assets, they use a 50% threshold.
50%. Where does that number come from? Not the hadith, presumably.
No, this one comes from a fiqh rule, a jurisprudential principle.